Hello and welcome to Royale Without Cheese, our bi-weekly podcast in which we discuss both the classic and the unknown of art and popular cinema from the then and now. We are your hosts, me, Leonardo Miranda, Miguel Aido,
Hello.
and Tomás Ferreira.
Hey.
Today we talk about A Page of Madness, but before any ados, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, or simply give us a like. A Page of Madness is a 1926 Japanese silent horror film directed by Teinosuke Kinugasa. Set in a mental institution, it follows one of its janitors, a man trying to free his deranged wife from the asylum. Lost for 45 years until it was rediscovered by Kinugasa in his storehouse in 1971, the film is the product of an Avant Garde group of artists who tried to overcome naturalistic representation all the way back in the 1920s. After being rediscovered, it screened at Cannes in 1973 and is considered one of the hallmarks of Japanese experimental silent cinema. However, what did RWC truly think about this high dive into the stranger-than-fiction rabbit hole, right down to the heart of insanity? Fellas, what do we say? Are you feeling crazy?
I certainly am. But before any ados with our review, I must thank one of our dear listeners, Ben Knoll, for suggesting A Page of Madness for our little episode here, amongst many other cool films in his bucket list. So shout out to Ben. It is one of my favorite silent films, and I did make an essay back in the first year of film school about it. Curiously enough, we are reviewing two films that have some sort of a early film relationship with two hosts in this podcast, me being with A Page of Madness and The Night of the Hunter with Miguel. Curiously enough, I think he made an essay. And I knew or discovered A Page of Madness with a curious documentary that I must introduce to our listeners, because some of them probably know, but
Mark.
Mark
the story of film An Odyssey by Mark Cousins. It's like 120 years of cinema, more than 1,000 films in this documentary, which is like 15 hours long, and is one of the richest documentaries about the history of film around. So if you want to check out the history of film, do so. 5 discs, it's amazing.
And let me add, with the greatest voice of a narration ever put to film or documentary.
True. It is unique, and I have to say, Mark, we love your enthusiasm for film, great accent, but 15 hours, well, I'll just say that. It's a bit difficult, but yeah, it's great. Lenny.
All right. Lenny.
Where you want to start with?
I thought you were going to
Lenny,
develop.
Mike, what did you think of this film? I can't kickstart the ball because I was the one with the essay, but I want to know what did you guys think about this film? It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because to me, it's a very unique silent film, not just because of how it does not have any title cards.
Yes.
It's a film that you read without that aid, so to speak, into the dialogue, and actually well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that word aid is kind of the key point, because it really doesn't aid the understanding of the plot, I think. And for me, it was one of those films that really makes the case that even though it's silent, there's always little helps with intertitles and dialogues, whatever. And those really help, and they usually are there for a very specific reason. And even if they still mean that films aren't completely clear, they do help, most of them, understanding the films a bit better. And in this case, I really didn't feel like I understood the plot like I wanted to. So yeah, for me, it comes back to this idea that I was expecting something to show up here and there, a dialogue that some character's saying, or some reference point to a place or whatever, really. But yeah, it wasn't appearing, and I felt like, oh no, I think I'm getting lost here.
No, I perfectly understand that, and and sympathize that. Yeah.
But I did read that the part of the film is not here in this version, so I think that helps a lot too. But yeah, those are my thoughts generally. What do you guys think?
Halfway through, I went to Wikipedia to read the synopsis. Like I'm not.
I did the same thing. I did the same thing.
Yeah, like, because I was reading it out. Oh, I totally missed that. I did not understand a lot of the things that. So I think it does help making the film better if you read what it is about, or if you watch it first and then read everything and then watch it again. I don't know if that's a perfect method, but I think as I was going over it again, like knowing what it's supposed to be helped a lot in understanding better, like the relationship. Like I didn't fully understand that that was his daughter until I read that
No,
it
no,
was
me
his
neither.
daughter. So it
And when
helps knowing
revisiting
that.
my essay, I realized, so that what it was. My past self was telling
No,
me.
no, it was his wife, right? Don't get me confused.
No, no, it wasn't
Yeah,
his wife. It was his daughter.
the wife is institutionalized.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
daughter is the girl that comes up
yeah,
and
yeah.
visits and is mad at him. So yeah, it's a very confusing film in many ways. I think that there's a benefit to that in terms of making everything so sensorial, making it very
Mm-hmm.
an
Mm-hmm.
experience of images right from the beginning. It starts off
It's very Godard,
incredible.
like.
Yeah, very intense editing. It's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
Ooh, Thomas disagrees with my
Yo,
I
statement.
mean,
don't compare it
I wouldn't say
to
that
Godard.
exactly. No, no, no. It's not due to any hate, but
Tomas hates Godard.
uh, no, 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 no. It's not. Not. It's my reaction doesn't come from that, but it's not. I'm not thinking. Godard came so much later, and there were already things in place at the time in the beginning of the 20th century that influenced this film that have nothing to do with Godard. And the very fact of saying this is really a comment to an interesting comment to the fact, kind of art feeds upon itself and it's a circle, because what this film is a confluence between expressionism and impressionism, and also the modernist art that was coming from the late 19th century with and beginning 20th century, with Virginia Woolf, for example, writing about streaming of consciousness in her writings, an interior monologue, and how to access those inner perceptions of the human mind regarding the outside world, which really blends well with this film. So, of course, there are aspects I understand why you mentioned Godard perfectly. Yeah,
No,
the
I mean,
fast
I
cutting
just,
and all that.
yeah, it's just a parallel to another director who I think has some traits in his films that we can talk about here and see here as well. But
Yeah,
I mean, I don't mean to say that
but is it
it was a
because
direct connection.
it's just Godard is more of a loaded figure idea because he brings with it a lot of other baggage. I think with him,
Sure.
the characters are not so much characters; they're ideas. They're vessels for ideas. And symbols here. I empathize more with the characters much more than I would with a Godard film where that is not so much an opening. But that's me. I think the dialogue with the Godard film is different between spectator and film than what you have here. I really feel for this man, and I really am with his story. And regarding your comment on the titles, I totally agree that you would understand a lot more of the plot than without. But honestly, at the same time, I think that without them, it really, and for the nature of the film that it is, it really helps you to dive in a story that is so filled to the brim with experimenting with the techniques of motion pictures to really create this sense of this clash of sanity and insanity, that without you trying to rationally understand this film, really allows you to become free. And it's a film about that sort of freedom in reading the human experience. So I think it's quite interesting that we don't have that date. Of course, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you don't fully understand it. I totally understand what that feels like, because I didn't understand at first. I wasn't reminded that that person was a daughter. I thought it was another relationship. So I need to read a little bit. But perhaps that was what I had to do at the time when first watching it too. But then again, it provides for an interesting experience. I think it's one of my favorite silent films. I think the opening is very interesting. If you want to start by talking about the opening, what were your feelings on that?
Immediately throws you like into it's just so intense and it's just like a deluge. It's like a fucking raining of images that some of them you don't even understand why. Like there's that lady dancing and behind her there's like a ball rolling, like a giant ball. Like I don't have a like what is that? I'm not sure, but it's the feeling it creates is like of insanity in a way, and I think that's intentional to then go into the mental hospital.
I think it kind of puts you in the mood of what the hell is happening? What am I supposed to expect from this film? And to a certain extent, it's even confusing because you start to think, is this all I'm gonna see? Is this how the film is going to be structured? And then eventually kind of dissolves and gets some bearings, and I think it becomes the film that eventually it becomes. But yeah, that first sequence kind of throws you off, and yeah, I mean, can't say that I didn't enjoy other parts of it probably better, but I think it was kind of an interesting way to start the film because it really, jolts you and oh, okay, let me see what this is about because this is really not traditional.
Yeah, not traditional. That's right. And it's a film that was produced by a group of these avant-garde artists in literature and theater in the Shingakuan. I think that's the term. Who really it was a school of Japanese arts that was seeking new perceptions, um, how to study the perception of human experience. Yeah, it's very interesting what it does in that opening because essentially we have this, like I said before, this influence from Impressionism in the way that it uses its editing, its fast-paced editing, and also through the mechanism of the device of the visual device that is the camera. It does these wondrous, very modern things that you are not used to seeing in a silent film. You have these fast pans, that are repeated not only in that opening, but then later on when you revisit the several patients in the common room and are being tended by the doctors, they are doing these activities. And, you just have the fast panning camera to the different patients and rolling, it really creates this sense of being within the subjective point of view of a patient at that asylum, and is really a collective consciousness that the film creates in that opening of being in the state of all those patients. Of course, we have one that leads the way at that opening, has a sort of key character who is not even a protagonist. Our protagonist is that janitor and his wife. But the key character in that first opening is the dancer, the dancing, kind of patient that Leo was talking about. And it really functions as a way to express what we are about to see. What is this film about? This clash between sanity and insanity, and the fall from sanity into insanity. That question: can the normal person actually become mad? And what is that process? That has happened in films so much. You have also A Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest, where Jack Nicholson, goes from this very wry, ironic, fun convict in an asylum and turns into madness, which is very interesting. And in this film, you have that case with a janitor in trying to help his wife getting out of the asylum, or at another level, there's this subplot with the daughter where she's trying to get a marriage, and within the Japanese society, or within even the Western society, to be married with someone who had an insane person in the family, that is considered horrible because there's this idea that insanity is going to be inherited. So what he's trying to do with his daughter at one level throughout the film is trying to conceal the fact she has a crazy mother. So he has all these dreams about the husband finding that out and what would happen then, the collapse of the marriage and so forth. There's all those worries bubbling inside him. But that opening, coming back around to it, it's very interesting technically because of the fast-paced editing. You really feel you are inside of mind who is convulsing with these fast-paced images, the juxtapositions of the shadows of the trees, hitting the windows. There's a real beautiful motif with the water from the rain just sliding through the dirty terrain and going against this very concrete, hard structure of the asylum, with these windows. And specifically, then you have also kind of the light and shadow play with the barred windows and the barred doors, these vertical lines that then become diagonal and spiraling, now circular. And there's this constant mirage of images that try to distort what is straight, and I love that, and just cuts through the rational being, and you cannot have more of a specific analogy to that than like the picture of the dancer cut up in parts which is inside her room, and that really reflects, that other shot, which is when she is dressed like this very sumptuous dancer in this cabaret sort of show, and the spinning wheel behind her, the camera pushes out, and we unveil finally the sane world, the real world. We come out of this, surrealist nightmare-fueled dream, and we start to see the bars, and then suddenly cut to this chiaroscuro opening where from the shadows comes light, and we see the shadow of this dancer inside a jail cell, and then we start seeing every and each patient in these Dutch angles kind of clang to the walls. And so we start to come to the natural world, and we start to be introduced to our main characters of the janitor in trying to talk his wife back to normality. And it's very interesting how the film is always in dialogue between the normal world and then the insane world. You know, the very subjective point of view and an objective point of view. That's very interesting, that opening. And it's very influenced. It's a film that is famously influenced by the cabinet of Dr. Caligari in Germany, through this use of, you know, sharp shadows and these great lines that really contort itself and reveal this very unstable state of mind. Yeah, that's very interesting. And as far as for the protagonist, it's himself, you know, the janitor. His battle with all of this is very interesting, you know, and the very episodes of Stream of Consciousness, where he goes from this daydreaming about a traveling fair outside. And by the way, this is very interesting because the traveling fair with all the drums and the trumpets, you know, announcing its passage through the city, really hints you at what were all those instruments in the beginning, in the opening, with the dancer kind of dancing along to those instruments. All that nature, all those elements are clashing in her mind, and she's thinking about the sounds of the. It's a film that, although silent, it's very evocative of sound, you know, which is very interesting. You can actually hear sound happening, you know, and when you see,
But the music is also really good at
Mhm.
conveying that, I think.
it's very good. I agree, very good. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it was specifically composed after it was
In
rediscovered,
the
so it makes
70s.
sense that I was sort of having, because I thought maybe it was some random music that they composed, but like the director didn't really know about, because sometimes they do that for silent films. But I think in this case it was commissioned by him, so it's like very perfect and really. But it also has a modern feeling, modern in terms of like, you know, that it's not like 1920s music. There's some instruments in there, some
Yeah.
sounds that aren't quite what you're
It's very
used to
like
hearing.
the music from Pulse or Cure.
Yeah,
Reminded
something
me
a
of
bit
this
more.
early 2000
Right.
Japanese
Yeah,
films.
there's some
Yeah,
brooding,
yeah.
like droning sounds at times.
Yeah.
It's like not usual. It works really well.
Yeah, and it raises a kind of interesting question where these films that get rediscovered years later then have this sort of addition, whether it's music or certain shots, but usually it's the music, and how that kind of informs the film in new ways so many years later, and sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But I think it's interesting to think that sometimes because it's a very specific medium where you can just add music to the film and it remains the same thing visually but with an extra layer, that it can become so much better and so much more powerful visually. So yeah, I think that's cool.
Yeah. Sometimes another kind of in other kinds of approaches, or precisely have the applying to a silent film a music that was not commissioned by the director himself. You have happenings that are not so fortunate. I think Metropolis with 80s music, it's a fun experiment, but it's wild, and I didn't quite like when we saw it back in the day at film school. It kind of was shocked to us. What did you think about that, actually? Because it was constantly distracting of the movie to me. You know, I did not appreciate it. I don't know if you have any memory of that. Now that we're
Not
speaking
entirely
music and
sure. I
film.
didn't fall asleep in that class, but
Right. What was that? History class, or was it like
No, it was
aesthetics?
with
Oh
our.
yeah, it probably was film music.
Yeah, it
It
was
was film
that
music
one
class.
that then at the end
yeah,
of
I
the
think
class
so,
we
yeah.
composed our own like music for our own scenes that we chose from some other film. I don't. I think so. I think that was the class. I don't know if you guys did that.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
cool.
you did.
No, we did.
uh,
I did Blade Runner. I did. I picked up a scene from Blade Runner and I made music for that. It was with Ableton. Yeah.
if it was the same class, then I did like a scene for the master from PTA.
Oh, cool.
But I
That's
didn't know
nice.
that. But I thought it was. I thought we had seen that film in some others or historic lesson,
Context.
kind of apart
I
from
mean,
Right.
that.
because
Yeah.
like that
Actually,
class, the
yeah.
teacher always, the class was like, "Ah, let's watch a movie." They just put movies on.
Yeah.
That was one
And
of
then
them.
let's look at the Wikipedia page. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. You were talking about the Marauder, Giorgio Marauder thing. I think also a problem with that version is that it's much shorter. It's like 80 minutes or something. So it also doesn't feature a lot of
Right.
the film. So I don't like it's a many problems with that version, I think. The music doesn't help obviously, but it's not the whole film, I don't think, because the normal Metropolis is like 2 hours and something. I think it's very long.
And then going beyond the music, is still within the techniques that this film employs to really express insanity. It's very interesting to see. I mean, we see distorting mirrors, which are very evocative of Seconds, which was a film which we've spoke of in our past reviews. And you also have Dutch angles. You have fast panning, camera movements.
You have
It's very
dissolves.
interesting. Dissolves, juxtapositions. I mean, amazing juxtapositions of barred windows with the instruments and this sudden neon sign that appears at the beginning. That fast cutting and those fast camera movements and the use of mirrors is really evocative of the impressionistic school of art, where the whole purpose of those artists was to investigate how our perceptions interact with the moment, the instant of the natural world in connection to us. And then the confluence of what the expressionistic movement is really comes from the light and shadow play, that comes from those barred windows, from, those dark figures and those like little dark circles that really emphasize a character in a given moment, which has a very ominous disposition. And I have to say, I recently watched Megalopolis. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but Megalopolis is interesting how Night of the Hunter really borrows from expressionistic, 1920s films. We're speaking of a film from the 1920s that is really living that moment in time of all that those art forms, and is clearly influenced by them, and German expressionist cinema. And then you have Megalopolis from this great filmmaker that is Francis Ford Coppola, kind of 85 years old now, and my God, that film is, I really want to rewatch it. It left me with very mixed feelings, but really the desire to watch the film again, and the desire to watch the film again after I see the films that he has recommended on Letterboxd on his list that inspired the film, because it's a film that really would be interesting to pair it up with a film from the 1920s. It really has those little circles focusing on a character, a device that he Coppola has used before in other of his movies. I think he has even
I
used
think
it
on
in
The
Dracula.
Godfather. And on The
Oh yeah?
Godfather.
Oh, that's
think so.
interesting.
I think it's familiar on that film, but
I think he definitely has used it on Dracula, and that's a device that I really love. And today, watching the Queer from the trailer from the upcoming film with Luca Guadagnino, it was really interesting to have kind of something evocative of that era as well, which is you see images of Daniel Craig and his co-star in this bar or in intimate scenes together, and they're really still. And then there's this juxtaposition of this this double kind of view of the real Daniel Craig, and then kind of a ghostly Daniel Craig, trying to reach out for his co-star. There's this kind of desire to be intimate. And I don't know if I'm kind of being clear enough if you are imagining what I'm saying, but but in old silent movies, you would have the situation where a character, you would have the real person, and then if you wanted to express the soul leaving the body, you would have this double act thing where the this double of the person would leave, and it would be kind of transparent. I don't know how you create that in old film stock, but it's a very interesting and evocative instrument
I think
of
it's
expression.
like
Double exposition.
yeah,
All
to the
right.
point where it
Okay.
becomes transparent. Kind of something we saw also in Manuel de Oliveira.
Or in Sherlock Jr. Isn't that what he did? I don't know if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's that's a good example. Also, in the Phantom Carriage, that happens with Victor Jostrom. That happens as well, because the character who passes away and then his soul leaves his body, and it's a kind of Christmas Carol narrative where he revisits the wrongdoings of his past, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, that's a device I really like, and I really love when kind of it's what I was saying in the beginning. Art feeds upon itself. So when modern films kind of go back and retrieve those devices, really giving out respect for the audacity of these old films, and making it like a serpent that eats back its tail, that kind of idea, that image is very interesting. I really love it, because there's so much richness that can be found in this film itself. A Page of Madness, I think, is such a delicious silent film in what it does. And I really feel for this janitor, because then he's really a man battling against the disease that lives inside his wife, who killed their newborn child, the kind of the brother of this daughter that he has, who is about to get married. And there's this beautiful image of the wife in one of the first interaction that he has with his wife, seeing their baby through an air vent, or what I thought at first was like a draining hole, but I think it's an air vent. And again, there's this whole kind of connotation with water, and you then realize that the child died
And isn't
by
that
because
that's
he
through a
drowned her.
flashback, isn't it?
That's true. At first, it's a vision, then it's elaborated further through a flashback. Yes, that
No, but
he
it's
goes
cool
to
that
his room and sees her.
it's another
Yeah,
device. I don't think we mentioned, but yeah, it's cool. That
yeah. That's very cool, and I really love that. And I think you see really a man battling between, the love that he has for his wife, trying to bring some sense of normalcy to his life, trying to free her, and trying to keep, his daughter's husband away from the reality that she has a deranged mother, or a mother who is mentally ill, to be more fair to the situation. And yeah, it's really interesting to see him battling those two sides, because then you see these really violent. It's a really violent film at times, because then you see how revolted and frustrated this man is to this other side of his wife, which is his illness. Her illness. I mean, because at one point, I don't know if in dream or if in real life, but he attacks her, he punches her, he's bad towards her, he's violent towards her. Or then with another inmate, there are sometimes these outbursts of fury at the asylum, where these inmates, there's at one point, there's this flood of inmates going to the cell of this dancer patient, and as she's dancing from one side to another, almost in this kind of sexual scene, so to speak, because there's this male gaze towards that dancer. You see these faces contorting around the bars, again the motif of these bars coming in onto the scene, as if to express the madness and the incarceration of these minds, who are really alone with their deranged thoughts, only to communicate with themselves. Yeah, it's really interesting, that image of a soul who is alone with itself, speaking with itself. They cannot really interact with normal people, because the only people they're really conversing with are themselves. And they're these deranged, unconnected thoughts. They are expressed so beautifully in this film. And then you have the smiling faces. They really become the motif of madness in this film. By the end, he can't either free his wife from the institution or make his daughter stay. The only family that he really has is he descends into madness, and he just gets tired of his failed attempts at trying to regain that normalcy. He just kind of, the only way to really find that normalcy is to really unite with the patients, and they become his family in a sort of way. He starts redistributing these smiling masks, as I was saying, the smiling, and becomes this motif for madness, and he really conceals any sort of prior being. They just become these ghosts, I think. And yeah, so it's a very violent film. And at one point, when he starts in that scene where there's this flood of mentally ill patients going to that cell of that dancer, you really see that first glimmer of violence and revolt against the disease, the madness, when he jumps at one of the patients and starts beating him, and you feel awful for the patient and you feel awful for him. You really have contradictory feelings about what this character does. So I really want to kind of also see what did you thought of those moments in terms of the character development that this film makes in a very silent way, because like we said before, there are no titles.
Yeah, what I was gonna comment was on that, because even though the film stylistically is very good at conveying this insanity, really everything that it does technically goes in that direction. And I think the film's very good at that. The problem for me, as I said in the beginning, was plot-wise. You kind of miss a lot of points, and so
But what did you? I'm
it
interested in
was
knowing,
hard
what
to
didn't
create that
you?
emotional
Yeah, what
connection
didn't
with
you
the
understand?
janitor.
What didn't you understand about it? I want to see.
It's kind of hard to say, because, like Leo, I went to Wikipedia at some point, and I just from there I got an idea where the story was going, or what I had seen, and so it became a little easier to interpret the images and the conflicts.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, at the point where I checked, I really wasn't understanding like who was who, mostly, and I could tell like the basic stuff where his wife was imprisoned, was not imprisoned, locked up.
Institutionalized.
Yeah, institutionalized, exactly. And that there was this trauma in the family, but not much more. And so yeah, going back to what I was saying, the link emotionally was harder for me. And even it's one of those films where formally it does everything right, but then narratively it it's not that it doesn't, it's just that I know that there's a part of the film missing that probably helps to explain a lot. But even though that happened, I think it still is missing a lot of information. Or perhaps it's so caught up in the formal aspects that it kind of neglects the narrative side, and perhaps isn't focused quite purposefully on trying to explain things for the audience. And that's fine, as you were saying before, because I think that helps to give this sort of sense of instability and insanity, which is also interesting, I agree, because it kind of puts you in this strange mood where you're kind of in it like the characters. But I don't know, maybe it's because we are all modern spectators or whatever it is, but I always feel a bit missing from wanting to have that more clear story being told.
I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I really enjoyed that, and I think it really fed into the narrative. Although I understand that, for example, I really understood the main, and what that was what made me cling to the pathos of the film that was still there was the fact that I did understand this guy was a janitor working there to try free his wife, who got mad. Yeah, and that all came from the trauma of their son dying at her hands. I understood that in the moment while watching it. Haven't read anything, and I understood that to the very end. The bit where I was a bit more lost was in understanding, having not read the synopsis or anything prior to watching the film, was a subplot of the daughter. Is that a new love interest? Is that the that was the bit I was a little bit lost. So after the movie, I reconnected with understanding what that was, and that I need to understand. But I don't think that not knowing that spoiled the whole experience for me, or that being unclear throughout the film, which was unclear, spoiled the whole thing for me. I understood that whoever she is, she's someone from the outside, well, who is just he is trying to maintain whether daughter or love interest. So there's some emotionality there that I can still understand or have a sense of. So it didn't spoil it for me, though. I understand where you're coming from.
I suppose, but I think the through line should have been a bit clearer to hold you in and not be so mistaken in the insanity where you're just confused. So to not mix the two up, I think it should have been a little, yeah, a little clearer. And for me, the biggest way to connect with the janitor actually was through his acting. I thought it was really cool and
Uh
impressive.
huh. Uh huh.
And the faces that he does, it just spoke a lot of the pity that he felt for his wife, and I thought that was really beautiful acting. Every time he had these close-ups of his face contemplating his wife. So for me, it was more literally through the acting that you connected with the character.
Mm-hmm.
But
No, that's
perhaps
completely involved there, of course. Yes, yes. What about you, Leo?
I missed the titles. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay,
I'd
okay.
like them. I'd like the contextualization a bit more traditional. Just it can even be poetic. I don't know, but I get it. Like it is like we're talking about like a part of the film missing, and I don't know if you mean that the film used to have title cards and it doesn't have anymore, or if that's what you're
no, what
mentioning.
I read, let me just
Because like since the film was rediscovered, like there's a conscious decision to remove that part. I think, at the
let me
very
just
least.
get the information right. But what it was so there's this, okay, coupled with the fact that the surviving print is missing nearly a third of the 1926 version,
Okay, a
making it
third.
difficult for modern viewers. So
That's a lot
Right.
of the film missing.
yeah,
Jesus,
it's
I
a
didn't
lot. So it's
realize
not
it.
just
It's true.
it's
It's
not
true.
just contextualization through titles. It's plot wise probably a lot too, and I'm sure a lot of other sequences of insanity where we would be confused too. But I'm sure whatever it is, it would help a lot because a third is still a third. So
Yeah, that's it. I don't know. I missed a bit of the classic silent film cards that even through more poetic language explains some of the context or some of the feelings that the characters are feeling. Uh, because that it's that thing. I'm reading the Wikipedia thing, and there's certain things that I completely missed. Also through my own fault, of course, but I think I would have understood it better if there was some sense given by title cards. Uh, but I get it. I get it that it's a very unique film and loses a bit because of it, but it gains other things. As Tomás is saying, it for him it works completely. I think even Man with Movie Camera, that Ziga Vertov film, even that one, I
That
think
one is even more wild, you know.
yeah, but that, I mean, it was 2 years later. It's like I wonder if he did watch this film, A Page of Madness, because there
Yeah.
are similarities. And I think, I mean, to go back to the Godard connection that Miguel made in the beginning, there is a playfulness, an understanding of like the film form and having fun with it, even though it's in a very strange and very dark context that Kinugasa does. That is, something that Godard also did in the beginning of his career. I mean, throughout his career, which is just reinventing and utilizing the film form in very new and at the time unexpected ways. And I think that's what this film also does. I think that's an easy connection, and I understand why Miguel would make it as well. Obviously, Godard wasn't the only one, and Kinugasa wasn't the only one making weird shit with film form, but I think there is very modernist connection here.
Even though I have these problems with it, the greatest thing is that it's in being experimental. It's so weird and innovative, and I always applaud efforts that try to do things a bit differently, even if I won't totally connect with or agree with or whatever. But I think it's always fun to see new things that can be done, and at this time it's even more impressive that you had such an experimental effort so early in the history of cinema. So I mean, in certain aspects it does things that you probably wouldn't see regularly for a long time. How the things we've been saying, how formally it all informs the insanity, I think it's very clever.
It informs the efforts of this main character, and it's not a separate thing from his voyage and what he's trying to do, his actions, and so for that matter, I think he really informs the pathos with the character and me understanding his desperation with his wife. That's why ultimately, despite me not understanding fully some aspects, I can really appreciate the film. So I don't see them as separate things, just, oh, it's an aesthetic thing, but the narratively doesn't really work. I think, it really does. It really informs. Though, again, I really understand that a lot of the film is missing. It's very difficult or frustrating, or can be frustrating, to try and watch a film and then a whole subplot flies you by, like the thing with the daughter. I get that. So yeah, I think it's a very subjective thing at this point with the film that we have in our hands to present it this day. Did you know that I think 75%, at least according to a report of the Library of Congress, so in America, I don't know if it's just for American films or worldwide, but 75% of silent films are lost, and was a case of a lost film. That's why I mention it a lot too, because at the time when they were making these films in the beginning of the history of film, they didn't find the value in these things, so they just let it rot, or and recycle them to do other things. Yeah, it's really strange.
Like lots
And
of
then there comes the fact
Lubitsch
of,
films that I'm trying to watch, and then it's like they're lost. Just
oh
like
shit,
Jesus.
that's awful.
Or Mizoguchi. Mizoguchi has like a ton of silent films. I think he like I don't, maybe I'm confusing it with someone else, but there's a direct. I think it's Mizoguchi that like the first film of his that we can see is like his 30th film. There's 30 lost films that we don't know.
Right.
Hopefully they can find them.
Yeah, it's either due to not giving the right value to the film, so just discarding them and using the material to make other stuff, or then to like chop. For example, there was the occasion of chopping it in little pieces and making a little, those little machines where the public would go put a coin and look inside and just watch a piece of the movie, like commercialize it in that sort of way. Or then you had accidents like studio fires, because it was nitrate film until 1952. So then we would have a lot of accidents, just like it happens, although more intentionally, in Inglorious Bastards, with the film catching fire, but that is weaponized to kill Nazis. Yeah, so. That we would have that incident. MGM had an incident like that. I don't know. Another studio had that. Back in
I
the 30s
suppose
and
making
50s.
copies was expensive. I'm not sure how that process worked, but
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Yeah. So institutions like the Film Foundation are very important in preserving these films and bringing them back. Trying to find as much as possible.
Yeah.
I think
There's
It's a real
a
concern.
Murnau film now I think of that is lost, and the last copy was like he lended it to an actress, and then she just lost it. Like she never returned it. It's like the
Oh
film
my
is lost
God,
forever.
what
It's
the
like wow,
fuck?
it's so stupid.
When
How
you
is that
lend your
even?
friend your DVD and you say, "Be
Yeah,
careful with
be
that," yeah,
careful.
sure. Then he goes.
But it's so. But just to wrap up, it's so funny that you said that thing, Tomas, with films sort of just being scraped off for something else, because it's kind of like it wasn't entirely a medium, I suppose, and it was kind of a novelty thing. So it's interesting to see how these early films were not so much like individual art pieces, but more like, I don't know, this sort of entertainment novelty thing where, okay, let's just do one and then move on to the next, kind of like videos in the modern age where you kind of don't really care about making a stamp of it and just keeping it. You just do one and then move on to the next. And I don't know, it has this sort of entertainment popcorny thing, a value that isn't really, art value or like a film like we think about today. So yeah, that you could just discard it and yeah, I just did one, let's do the next.
I'm sure there were artists back then, artists, filmmakers who really looked at what they've made, they wanted to preserve it.
Sure,
But
sure,
then you
sure.
had like the producer side of things, who really, especially in Hollywood, who didn't really care about what would be the outcome of
Like
that,
a
and were just
director
making
by
stuff.
himself can't copy a film like or preserve it alone. I mean, Kinugasa found it himself in his own home, I think, which is funny. Like he just had it lying around. How did
You
he
know, in his warehouse. I mean,
in his
first of all, how do you lose your film in your warehouse?
like how aren't you crazy over it?
Yeah, like where did you
Whoa,
lost it
wow.
exactly? Behind the couch, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Because that was the most surprising thing to read. It was his warehouse. You have a warehouse,
It's
like
usually it's like in a antique shop or something like
yes,
that.
like the case with what was that film?
Chest of the Wind.
Chest of the Wind.
Yeah.
He finds it in a VHS store or whatever antique house. We know, which was ridiculous. Someone else's place.
Maybe it went on this whole journey of antique shops and then it found its way back to his own warehouse.
Maybe,
Yeah, maybe there's like a film, like Bresson has that film where there's a dollar, it's just money, and the film is going around following that dollar bill around everyone, and there's little stories. Do the same thing with this film.
What's that film? Don't tell me it's L'Argent.
L'argent.
It is?
Exactly.
Okay, okay. Very appropriately named. Yeah, exactly. Wait, is that wait, that's the idea of the film, is that you follow this dollar bill from place to place?
Yeah, but the
Or
film
it's
is
just a
about
moment in the
something else.
film?
Yeah. No. I mean, it's the central premise, more or less. It's like it's the exchange of money, and you see that money go around each person. When you go from one person to another, like there's different narrative strands, let's say. But I don't know.
Uh-huh. Oh,
I
that's
watched it a long
interesting.
time ago. But yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. He really loves hands, doesn't he?
He loves it. It's
I
like
think so.
And that's all for today. If you'd like to reach out and suggest a film for the next episode, you can find us on the podcast official Instagram and website pages. Feel free to subscribe, share this episode, or simply give us a like. That's how our podcast can grow ever more groovy. And if you're on YouTube and want to see more videos like this, check out this next video right here. Thanks for listening and see you next time. Adios.